Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica, and welcome to this edition of Bite Size Art School, where we learn really big and important things about art by taking small bites at a time. In this episode, we're going to talk about our inherent knowledge of how paint is applied. And I'm going to ask for forgiveness of husky barking outside because outside in their play yard, because they're playing, and there's nothing I can do about that. Okay, anyway, it's likely that the first concept that you ever had of how paint gets from a paint can onto a surface is house painting, or when we were in kindergarten and first grade and so on, we got those tempera paints, and they were cool too. And it kind of was like house painting. You pick some up and you painted it on a surface. And things get more sophisticated than that. But basically, with gouache and acrylic paint and oil, sometimes it still can be that paint is here. In whatever medium you use or whatever, you pick paint up and you go like this. The medium where that doesn't work so well is watercolor. And there's a reason why it doesn't, but we're going to look at what the problem might be right in the first place with taking that concept of dipping the paint and go to the page. Does not work very well here. What I have in front of me is some scrap paper. This is, again, what I usually use is a 300-pound Arches, and this is a cold press. But it doesn't matter. This does not affect what we're talking about. Whatever watercolor paper you were on, it would happen. And if you're not on watercolor paper, you'd have a worse problem than that. But I'm going to show you what happens. Get some water here and a little paper towel over here. What happens that makes the trouble for a lot of people trying to paint with watercolor? And that is that you have a palette. I'm just going to pull this over here a little bit. And you wet the watercolor. Now, watercolor, you can have a tube and put some out on a palette, or you can buy half pans that are already dried in a palette and you re-wet them, or you can have a hybrid. All these half pans are filled with tubes to paint, but then I allow it to dry and re-wet it. So anyway, whatever happens there, you have a container of paint or a blob of paint. You know that you have to add water to it because it's watercolor. And so you do. And so we want to paint, this area, and it's going to be maybe the background of a forest, or this is Daniel Smith, Green Appetite, by the way, which is a delicious green. And we're going to cover this larger area, and we go get some more water, and we keep painting until the brush gets dry, and then we go get some more. And now, if you were painting the background for a rough forest, this is just ducky, right? You have a lot of difference in value here. You have darks and lights all over the place. There's no way like a smooth wash. So if a smooth wash was what you were needing, you're in trouble. If with the traditional dip and brush painting process. Why is this happening? It's happening because you're changing the ratio of the water and the paint with every dip. So you're getting dry, and then you are going getting some water, and you're going back in here. Meanwhile, the water if you were not getting water and just keep going back in here, you're going to get darker and darker and darker. Because what's happening, the paint is melting. It's not melting, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean. The paint is dissolving because water is sitting in it. And so that means the more pigment particles are being released, and that means the longer the water sits, the darker it's going to get in this pan that you're dipping into. And so you try to even that out, and you get some water on your brush, and you go in here, and then you have a different color. But again, look at that. Look at how there isn't any uniformity there at all. Okay, so sometimes you love this. Sometimes this is not what you want. You're trying to do a smooth background or the smooth surface of an item, and you would like it to be all one color. And I'm going to show you how to mix a perfect watercolor wash that will give you exactly that. And when we get done, we'll paint it right on here so you can see the difference. So I'm going to set this aside. The word wash does double duty in watercolor, triple duty really. If you use it as a verb, I washed this on. But the word wash itself is both the paint that you mix, you're making a watercolor wash, and once it's applied on the paper, it's a wash. And so, I mean, not that those are too different from each other, but the term is used for both things. And so we're going to mix a wash. I call it kind of a watercolor soup. Palettes for other types of paint can just be a flat plate. A lot of people use watercolor on a flat plate, but that's not when they're doing what we're trying to do. Oils and acrylics and everything, you can have anything as a palette. Watercolor palettes, this kind or this kind will generally come with mixing wells. And this one is just, and sometimes they're all mixing wells. You know, this is dedicated to mixing paint, and this one, if this were a commercial palette here, it's not. It's one that I made. It would have a tray or something, some kind of a thing where you can put water and make a soup. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need for our watercolor wash is water. And I like to take it out of a drip bottle like this. And just because it's handy and you can control the amount of water. I say control just as I sat this down and splashed some things over here. Control is not even a thing, I don't think. Not when in the subject area we're in of watercolor. We want to add paint to this soup and mix it in until we get a value of this color that is what we want for our smooth wash. Okay, so I'm going to dip into water. I'm going to wet my paint and soak the brush and stir it in to the wash. I'll do that a couple times here just to start because I want a nice... Some paints you need to add a lot, and some paints like this green apatite, very pigmented. And most artist grade paints are really pigmented and will make great washes right off the bat. But if you have a color like yellow or something light, it's going to take a few more than what we did right here. But it also depends on what you want. What value do you want to paint with? Now, I am not going to take this right over to my test because this also has the thick paint I picked up from over here to mix in is still in this brush. So if I start painting a wash with this brush, I'm not going to be much better off than I was here. So the deal is when you are, like I said, control, right? When you are mixing a wash and testing the color to see if it's as dark as you want, you have to wash the brush. Unless you were mixing with a different one. You can use two brushes if you want to. But anyway, I got all of the paint. I'm dampening it off on a paper towel over here. I got all of the paint off of this brush. So at this point, I can dip my brush into my watercolor soup here and know that whatever is in this brush is just the color of this wash, okay, without anything else going on. And it's pretty light. And let's say for whatever project I'm doing, I don't want it that light, okay? So we're going to go in and we're going to get more paint, more pigment, and mix it in. And I'm going to go a few steps this time because I want to be kind of considerably darker. And I can always lighten it up if I have to by adding some water. And you stir it in as much as you can so that you get the paint off of your brush and into the soup. Okay, I'm washing it off in the wash-off jar, not in the clean water jar. All right, and now no paint is on here at all. And I'm going to make sure the only paint that gets on here is the soup paint. And I'm going to test it again. I like this better. Do I want to be any darker than this? I don't know. But I want you to notice something. See how smooth that is? See how smooth? This is going to run back a little because I had so much that puddled. How smooth that is. Look at that difference, right? You're going to get exactly what you want from this. And I think as this is soaking in, I like this mid-tone. And this would be what I'm going to use for my imaginary project here where I need a smooth wash. So I still have only this on this brush because I did not go back to make it darker. So I'm good. I'm good to go painting with my wash onto the watercolor paper. And I'm going to do that. I'm picking up a lot of paint with my brush, and I'm going to stroke that evenly over the area that I need to put the brush on. Now you notice, even as I'm drying off here, I have fewer particles around. I am not getting a different value. So I can go in and I can even go over this while it's wet. And as long as I'm only dipping into the watercolor soup that we made, I am assured that I'm laying down an even layer of color. Now that is a perfect watercolor wash. Let's bring this front and center and make a comparison. Now you know exactly how to make a perfect watercolor wash. I'm going to give you a couple of other clues so that you don't ruin it. It is very difficult to put even a perfect wash soup over a very large area without getting into trouble. Why? Because watercolor dries. And this is really also a product of where you live and what the humidity is. And I live in Santa Fe, and the humidity is like nothing. And when I first moved here from California, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't do my watercolor the way I did. And I work in a greenhouse now to get the most humidity I can. But still, watercolor dries at whatever rate it dries at your house. But going over a very large area, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. This is already starting to dry. The idea of preserving your perfect wash is you apply it the way we did, and then you get out of town, and you don't go back in to do any correcting at all. And I'll show you why you don't do that. This is partially dry. If I go back in here now and I'm going to try and fix something, I'm going to ruin what's going on. And on top of ruining the smoothness, you see what else is happening here? So the water is backing off the little pigment particles that were there, making a blotch, and when this is totally dry, it's also going to make this hard line right here, which is called a bloom, or it's called a cauliflower. But when you don't want them, you don't want them. And you need to know how to avoid them. Otherwise, what do you end up with? Back with this textured kind of background thing. And so if you are painting a wash over a large area, it's important to only move the wet edge. You keep the wet edge moving. And so you don't go back over here. But while I was applying this and it was wet, I would just keep moving, keep getting more soup and keep moving that wet edge along without going back in there. This becomes very difficult in some situations. Say you have, I'm just going to use this now as our subject matter. Just suppose that this is something, flower pot, I don't know. But you need, and let's suppose that your art stops like right here. You need to put that wash you're going to put in the background evenly around the background. If you have a situation like this, you are going to want to start and go in one direction and keep going and moving the wet edge and come around here and come around here and hope, without much hope, that you're going to meet this. And if you live in Louisiana or something, you're going to make it. But if you don't, you may not. When these meet up, you may be in this kind of trouble right here. This is where people use masking fluid. That's a different subject, how to use that properly. But this is where it becomes necessary, when it's impossible for you to get a nice smooth background around something. You're going to mask that something so that you can paint right over it. And then it won't be, your subject won't be touched, but your wash will be even because you would be able to apply it just like we did here. So, since this is bite-sized art school, that's as far as we're going to take that. But this is how you can use a house painting approach to watercolor wash. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.